Hello, and welcome to Next City's SolutionsFest and our first webinar on how communities rebuild after climate disaster. My name is Sarah Schuneman, and I'm here from Next City. And across 7 events from January 13th to the 29th, we're bringing together more than 30 city builders to share evidence-backed solutions on topics like affordable housing, tenant organizing, new grocery models, creative civic infrastructure, heirs property, and scaling community power and economic development, all featured in our Solutions of the Year print magazine. To rewatch any of these sessions and to get a copy of the Solutions of the Year magazine, you can use the links I just dropped in the chat. Thank you to everyone attending today's webinar, to our bundle ticket purchasers and donors, and our sponsor, Results for America. I would also like to thank all of our speakers today, moderators, and partners for making this series possible. And now I'm glad to turn it over to Ross Tilchin, Director of the Economic Mobility Catalog at Results for America.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. It is wonderful to join you here today. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning. My name is Ross Tilchin. I'm the director of the Economic Mobility Catalog at Results for America. And Results for America is so pleased to sponsor Next City's Solutions Fest. Results for America is a national nonprofit with a simple mission. We are devoting to helping communities invest in strategies that actually work. We do this by helping governments and their partners harness the power of data and evidence to fund solutions that accelerate upward mobility and improve lives. We have worked with hundreds of government agencies at the federal, state, and local level, and community-based and place-based groups to improve public decision-making and to shift public dollars towards strategies that get results. My role is to lead Results for America's Economic Mobility Catalog. This is a free online resource designed to help state and local leaders identify and implement strategies that are proven to advance upward mobility. This is a resource that contains hundreds of articles, case studies, research briefs that all are intended to help you advance your work in improving economic mobility and quality of life for residents in your communities. Relevant to today's conversation, the catalog contains a number of resources that can inform strategies to rebuild after climate disasters. Just a few examples, and I'll drop the catalog in the chat via a link in just a minute. We have several best practice guides that focus on addressing vacant and abandoned properties, increasing housing supply, and revitalizing commercial corridors, and these briefs can inform program design, implementation, and evaluation efforts in your community. We have several case studies also relevant to this topic. Case studies like spurring infill development in South Bend, Indiana, addressing heirs properties in Jacksonville, Florida, and addressing vacant and abandoned properties in Genesee County, Michigan. These all surface valuable lessons from communities that have implemented these strategies successfully. Overall, the Economic Mobility Catalog at Results for America is a comprehensive and versatile resource that can support you wherever you are in your evidence-based policymaking journey. Please visit our website. Again, I'll drop it in the chat to learn more. And with that, I think I turn it over to Corinne, and I hope everyone enjoys today's event. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much, Ross. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending where you are in the world or in the US. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's discussion is focused on solutions for rebuilding after climate disaster. So today you'll be hearing from 4 local leaders in Altadena who have launched inclusive, community-led solutions in the aftermath of devastating fires that spread across Los Angeles just over a year ago. They're also going to share their advice for how to start doing this work in other communities. I've had a chance to get to know these panelists over the year while reporting for Next City as well as Afro LA, and these leaders really stood out to me because of their approach to centering survivors and communities of color as they work toward equitable recovery and rebuilding. So briefly, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Corinne Ruff. I'm a journalist based in Los Angeles. I have a decade of reporting experience from DC to St. Louis to Los Angeles. My work has been featured across NPR publications and in print publications as well. I'm currently an enterprise reporter at Afro LA, which is a nonprofit solutions journalism publication here in LA that elevates stories from Black and other marginalized communities. And in the last year, I've really focused on highlighting grassroots solutions coming out of Altadena. So before we dive into today's discussion, I want to do a little bit of table setting and provide some context. Climate disasters in the U.S. cost the U.S. more than $1 billion in damages last year. Severe thunderstorms, flooding, tornadoes, and of course, fires all contributed to this. More than half of that money went towards recovery from the LA wildfires. Here in LA, last week marked the 1-year anniversary since the Eaton and Palisades fires, which killed 31 people and destroyed more than 16,000 structures. The Eaton fire killed 19 people, and nearly all of them lived in historically Black neighborhoods in West Altadena, which did not receive evacuation alerts. The Eaton fire disproportionately damaged and destroyed Black and older households, and it also disrupted generational wealth and the passing of these homes on to younger generations, which is very common in these communities. One historical note is it's important to know that the areas around Altadena were heavily redlined, and so many Black families found first-time home ownership opportunities in Altadena. And although because of rising costs, the Black population has started to move elsewhere, many people are worried that because of this disaster, it makes it even harder for the Black population, especially older people, to remain within Altadena. So a year in, where do things stand? I have a couple of numbers I want to highlight from a report that was released this month from the nonprofit Department of Angels. It found that there is an uptick in people returning to their homes, which is good news, but 70% of residents who were displaced still remain so. Also, 4 in 10 residents have taken on debt or dramatically wiped out their savings. And many people want to rebuild, but there's many challenges that still lie ahead. Some of the top obstacles, of course, are cost, also uncertainty around insurance payments, payouts, feeling overwhelmed, and the concerns about environmental safety. Our panelists have all been working on alleviating these challenges, and they also have been navigating their own personal connections to the wildfires. But their ideas provide a really valuable blueprint for how to mobilize in the face of climate disaster and really help rebuild a community. So let me introduce our panelists. We'll go about one by one, and they'll provide a top-line update of where their work stands today, and then we'll dive into more questions. So first, let me introduce Steve Lewis. He's an architect, a member of the Altadena Rebuild Coalition, and he's also a key facilitator in alliances between other fire recovery groups. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Corinne, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is just another in an endless series of ongoing conversations with so many, both in the community and adjacent and outside, whose heartstrings were really pulled by the magnitude of this tragedy and disaster, to try to, as we humans do, step in whatever way possible to aid and be of help to, again, to Corinne's point, the disproportionately affected residents of West Altadena. And having said that, with so much of our conversation focused there, I do a 2-mile walk almost every day on the east side of Altadena. I live right sort of on the 1 block halfway down the street on the west side. So I walk through the east side, and there are more wealthier, affluent, larger homes, which were not spared as well. So the wind did not discriminate in the sense of the magnitude of this tragedy. Having said that, I, as an architect and urban designer, a resident, a Black man in this community, I'm at this unique intersection of being able to sort of parachute into a number of the groups. I'm on the Foothill Catalogs Advisory Board. I've also been working with Altadena Villages, which is concerned with the commercial corridor on Lake up by Mariposa. Also, the Altadena Steadfast Group, which is somewhat controversial, but still, through their resources, been able to gather large community engagement events where no solutions are being offered, but rather questions are being raised to the community to try to determine their own direction or our own direction. And lastly, and perhaps certainly not least, is the Southern California chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects, NOMA, for which I'm proud to say I served as national president for a couple of years back in 2009, 2010. And we stood up the Altadena Rebuild Coalition immediately after the event, which aims to provide one-on-one consultation with our community members who have lost their homes and lost their way. No one woke up ever thinking they would be designing a house or having to rebuild a house, and all of a sudden everyone is thrown into this chaos at the same time. And so I'll perhaps close by just saying, in the very beginning and continuing to now, I always stress the importance of not steps 1 through 5, but actually step 0, which is showing up for our neighbors with no expectation of trying to offer anything, but rather to simply be an ear, an empathetic ear, to listen to their trauma. And in the process, that is so important because it's the beginnings of trust building, which ultimately will be of help to our neighbors as they try to navigate through all of the noise that they're surrounded by, with everyone trying to, come in and be the salvation, the savior. So it's a human story for sure.
Thank you so much, Steve. Next, let me introduce Cynthia Sigler. She is an architect as well and a co-founder of the Foothills Catalog Foundation. Her group launched pre-approved home designs with historical architectural styles in mind that also facilitates speedier rebuilding. So Cynthia, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Corrine. Thanks for having me today. Hi, everyone. My name is Cynthia Sigler. As was mentioned, I'm a licensed architect here in California, based in Pasadena. And I am a resident of the Pasadena Altadena community. I was evacuated from my home on January 7th, and a long story short, our home survived by 1 block, but my husband and I, who's the other co-founder of the Foothill Catalog, came back to a community where our neighbors, our own community, was in a state of just, a scale of devastation that, none of us had really ever seen before. And so, both being architects, we recognized the need for alternate solutions in this rebuilding effort. And so that's where the Foothill Catalog was born, inspired by the Sears catalog program of the early 19th century, with many other companies as well, recreating the home kit program that built a lot of the American middle class. And so the mission of the Foothill Catalog Foundation, which is a nonprofit, is to develop a collection of pre-approved home designs for displaced residents to rebuild affordably and resiliently, and while collectively retaining our community identity and local architectural character. Thanks, Corrine.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cynthia. Next, let me introduce Niti Kaur. She's a fiduciary advisor who lost her home in the Eaton fire. She then became a community organizer and launched the Disaster Rapid Recovery Alliance to help people like herself find trusted information for rebuilding options. So Niti, I'll let you take it.
Thank you, Corrine. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Niti Kaur, and I was a former resident of East Altadena Drive, and hopefully looking forward to being a resident again since we've started our rebuilding journey. About a year ago, I had a misfortune of seeing our home burn room by room, and we stood there for 2 hours just grieving and also reminiscing all the memories that we've made. And after the first 25 minutes, I realized my partner and I were not just losing our home, but we were also losing our entire community, our neighborhood, and it just dawned on me that we have this, at least I felt that I personally had this immense responsibility of making sure that I'm one of those angels in the city or county of Los Angeles, a county of angels, to make sure that I'm a part of the rebuilding effort. So I started calling all the contacts that I have. I run a capital and a real estate advisory firm, so my background is in commercial real estate, so I know real estate and commercial real estate really well. And I started calling all the contacts nationally and internationally to make sure that we provide the solutions to our community members, specifically and especially to the marginalized community members, so that we can bring the cost of construction down. My firm was able to provide some very critical data, especially reverse mortgage data, to the Governor's Office of Emergency and also LA County, and we made sure that we contacted and communicated with the right county officials to get the temporary forbearance on foreclosures immediately after the fire. And I continue to keep providing advisory in the background for many nonprofits, coalitions, and groups that's working in Altadena. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Niti. And next, let me introduce Jasmine Schuper. She's the founder and president of the Green Line Housing Foundation in Pasadena. And after the fire, her nonprofit launched an emergency land banking initiative to help keep Altadena properties locally owned. So, Jasmine, I'll let you take it from here.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you this morning, afternoon. Like Corinne said, Jasmine Schuper, Green Line Housing Foundation. We are a Pasadena-based nonprofit organization founded in 2020, and our mission is to close the racial wealth and homeownership gaps and reverse the effects of systemic racism in housing that have happened through practices such as redlining, among other forms of legal housing discrimination. And we do that in three ways. One is homeownership preservation for Black and Brown people. Two is homeownership access. And three is financial education, which is a through line of all the components. And so because of our presence in the community, when the fire happened on January 7th, given what we know about the history of Altadena, the community of Altadena, the demographic distribution of Altadena, we knew that there would be, like Corinne said, disproportionate impact, as often happens in natural disasters, on community of colors. That's informed in part by this legacy of legal housing discrimination. And so we launched a thesis. The fire was January 7th. Anecdotally, we were evacuated from our home. Miraculously, it still survived. It survived. We live in Eaton Canyon, but we were displaced for 6 months. And so the fire was January 7th. On January 12th, we launched a two-phase, four-component, comprehensive Eaton fire relief plan, which the thesis of which, or the overall objective, is rebuild, restore, remain. So we wanted the disproportionately impacted population to be able to rebuild their homes, restore their neighborhoods, and remain in their community as part of an anti-displacement effort to retain the fabric of Altadena. And so we began providing interim housing as part of phase one, just to get that crucial housing stability so that people could look to rebuilding. And then phase two includes rebuilding assistance grants, recognizing there will be gaps in and above what FEMA or insurance will cover. And then phase 2B is land banking and community preservation as a means to keep the land in community hands.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. And thank you to all the panelists today. We're going to dive into some more questions. So let me go back to Steve and chat with you for a minute. We met last spring, and at the time, I remember you describing yourself to me as sort of an air traffic controller, pointing people in the right direction. And I'm curious, because you're really someone who has a pulse on all of the players and all of the things going on in Altadena with recovery. And so I'm curious, as you see these ongoing events and discussions, re-envisioning Altadena's infrastructure, what it will look like, how do you ensure that Black Altadenans are a part of the conversation so that the same structural inequities don't just repeat themselves?
Yeah, for the forever question, and thanks for that one. It's a tough one. I'm drawing a lot on my not too distant experience as the urban design director for Central Detroit at a time where Detroit is really remaking itself again, which means demographic shifts from what was an 85% Black city to whatever it will be when the dust settles after a lot of new investment and recovery. As a planning director with staff, doing a number of neighborhood framework plans, which are very much analogous to what we're trying to do here. Our motto, which we recited not on our side of the table, but on the community side of the table, and lock arms with them and say, nothing about us without us is for us. And I wish I could claim having invented that slogan, but it's really powerful when you say it in unison, and we ask them to say that with us and try to really build that trust. So, and even the smallest activities and events that involve the community to create a pop-up sidewalk crosswalk by painting a rubber mat and rolling it out on an intersection with young people doing it. Small activity, but big in the terms of ownership and trust. Here, what's unusual is that groups like Altadena Villages and Altadena Steadfast have not waited for a municipality to create a request for proposals for planning and design services. They rather have jumped out ahead and started to craft these visions, including fairly robust community engagement activities, right? This is something that a municipality generally does. Actually, I had the pleasure of meeting with Supervisor Barger yesterday in her office to talk about how the county, who all of these roads would eventually lead to the county as the major implementing authority, how the county can start to grab a hold of these efforts and organize them into a more sort of practical and standard framework, and give guidance and some relief to those who are just, climbing the mountain with no experience on their own, just trying to make this thing happen. And so I think that was well received, and there's some assurances that they've been trying to think that way. But I think we're at that moment a year later where that kind of leadership needs to be demonstrated. And I don't think that the groups who are advancing these ideas would be resistant to that at all, because they're just filling what has been a vacuum.
And briefly, Steve, do you have a little bit of advice for maybe communities of color elsewhere in the face of disaster? What's like one piece of advice you would give them to make sure that their voices can be heard in that process?
Well, I mean, it's not one single thing, Corinne. It's a three-dimensional approach, and I think having a resource like Green Line Foundation that is because this does boil down to money and economics, right? I'm recently installed chairman of the board of Century Housing, a CDFI in the state of California, who generally doesn't operate in the single family space, but is so moved by this tragedy and disaster that we're now looking at ways that we can insert ourselves either by supporting an organization like Green Line or by creating a program for homeowners directly. I think that outreaching to residents, which is what NOMA did through the rebuild readiness packages, where we had one-on-one relationships established between our members who are volunteering and individual families or homeowners, to really help guide them through these processes and look with no judgment at what their options are. If I'm 75, I can sell my lot for $400,000. I realistically have 5 or 10 years left of good years of my life. What do I want to do? You can't but if I decide to sell and I can sell my property to a Green Line Foundation, I'm achieving the higher goal of maintaining the kind of racial and ethnic diversity that has made Altadena the special place that it is, that the world is now seeing, that we who've lived here for a long time have understood and valued. To now have that on the mind, that's what's motivating and stimulating so much passionate involvement, good, bad, or otherwise. There are a lot of conspiracy theorists out there. There are a lot of, naysayers that don't want to trust. And I told Supervisor Barger, trust is built on performance, one step at a time. And as Mayor Duggan in Detroit taught us as staff at the planning department, you better damn well under promise so that you can over deliver. The other way is just destructive, because promises made and not kept just sustains this culture of mistrust of government. And we ultimately will need government to heal and make this right.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point to keep in mind throughout the process. Thank you, Steve. I want to talk a little bit about solutions to rebuilding. Cynthia, let's talk about the Foothills Catalog, because your group really led the way in getting LA County to pre-approve home designs, which is helping cut red tape, speed up rebuilding timelines. So can you talk a little bit about the pre-approval process, the benefits it has to cost reduction and speed, and what that is like to create that kind of process?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a lot of hurdles to overcome in the rebuild process, but one of the big ones is the permitting process. And with over 6,000 residential structures alone in Altadena affected and needing to be rebuilt, the need for alternate solutions was very clear, right? From the offset, from our standpoint as architects, but also I think from the county's perspective as the permitting authority. It was very clear that the status quo was not going to be sufficient in this case with the amount of need that there was. And so the pre-approval is essentially splitting the site approval and the structural approval into two separate processes. And so what we were able to work with the county, and this was a very collaborative process. We were meeting weekly with them from about February to really develop this new way to permit. And the process is essentially taking a home design and permitting just the structure. So without a specific lot, just permitting the structure so that once the structure is approved, it can be placed on any site that it fits from a zoning perspective. And so one pre-approved home can be used across a multitude of sites. And so that's essentially the process. And this has allowed us to be able to design homes, pre-permit them, pre-approve them with the county. And now the site-specific approval, which is kind of the last step prior to building permit, pulling the building permit, is just a one-page submission to the county with that pre-approved home on a site. And so that really simplifies the process. It cuts down on permitting, by 80–85%, and it's one less big hurdle for people. And so that was really like I mentioned, a big collaboration, a story of a partnership, and different groups of people working together to think about and implement solutions that help in this rebuild process, because it's certainly much needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and briefly, one thing I want to ask about is I know that Habitat for Humanity is using one of those models that you've designed. It sounds like maybe they're close. They'll be constructing that home and opening it up shortly. Could you tell us just a little bit about that process and how it went?
Yeah, absolutely. So our kind of collaboration and partnership with our local Habitat for Humanity chapter, which is San Gabriel Valley, was absolutely essential to the formation and growth of the Foothill catalog. And it was, very early on, back in February, so 2–3 weeks after the fires. My husband Alex and I, we actually got connected with the team at the SGV Habitat group, and we essentially showed up at their office with our stack of old catalog books, and we were like, this feels like a good idea, and we think that it can help a lot of people, and they were very, very receptive to it. And essentially what came out of that meeting was us developing 3 home designs, which became the 3 first designs, which built out the catalog, which is now close to 30 designs. But the very first 3 were developed in partnership with Habitat SGV. And those 3 designs will be built for 22 families in Altadena to start. And the first one, which is the one you mentioned on Pine Street here in Altadena, is slated to be completed very soon. We're hoping in the next month or so. The Woods family, who's a 3-generation Altadenan family, they lost all of the homes in their family, but this is the first one that is being rebuilt in partnership with Habitat for Humanity SGV. And so again, like I mentioned, with the collaboration with the county, this is another example of a partnership and a collaboration with another nonprofit locally in this community. And again, it's developing and implementing and executing these solutions for the people who need it the most.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the completion of that home coming very shortly. I mean, I think, a year after the fires, seeing a home about to be completed is very inspiring and really hopeful for the community. So that's really nice to see. Thanks for sharing more about that. Niti has also, dove into other types of options for rebuilding as well. So one thing I wanted to ask you about was that, many fire survivors, including yourself, were underinsured, which, kind of spurred you to launch your organization and explore prefab home. So could you talk a little bit about the difference in cost, and why it has taken off as a model for rebuilding after climate disasters?
Yes, very good question, Corinne. Thank you. From the very get-go, I realized that we were underinsured, and of course, you're dealing with a lot of grief, a lot of trauma, and then you're like, oh my God, how am I going to get back home? But very soon I realized we are still the lucky ones. We're still the blessed ones. We're a few $100,000 short, but hey, we'll figure it out. But there were a lot of community members who were completely so severely underinsured that they were not insured at all, which was the reverse mortgage data that I provided to the state and the county officials. And then while we were working on this, we also realized people were extremely severely underinsured and they probably would be getting payouts for like $200,000, $300,000. And in California, in a disaster area, and especially in one of the most expensive counties in the state, it's almost impossible to build up that price. And it's just a basic back of the envelope math. It doesn't take a lot of research to realize that at $100 a square foot or less than 150, $200 a square foot, it's almost impossible. So I am fortunate enough that my primary business and day job is commercial real estate, and I have a massive Rolodex of consultants and advisors that I can rely on. So I started making appointments and going to tour factories of all these prefab homes. And we toured at least 8 to 9 factories, and everybody, of course, wanted to help Altadena, but we specifically are planning to work with Clayton Homes because of their experience and all the in-house expertise that they bring to the table from and my focus, and we have been working tirelessly in the background to make sure that we are prepared and sensitive and efficient in helping severely underinsured or completely uninsured community members.
Yeah, yeah. One thing that I'm also curious about is because I know that your group includes some advisors who have helped with other disasters around the country. I'm curious how important that was, how valuable it was when you were creating your group in Altadena.
In the very beginning, it was very, very valuable. I have a lot of friends and partners and a couple of advisors in our group who are from Florida, so they see hurricanes all the time. And one of the first things that they provided me was a checklist of making sure that the community members are protected from the bad actors. So if somebody's trying to dupe someone or just, there were so many contractors just like sprouting out of nowhere, and there was no for a family or a community member who's not part of real estate in terms of that's not their career or they don't understand it. It's too much information too soon. Plus, you're dealing with your personal trauma. So we provided like an entire folder which included basic checklist of if you were to hire someone, make sure that you verify their license, you verify they're insured, you verify they're bonded. And then we also provided them attorney drafted contracts from hiring either subcontractors or contractors, ensuring that when you're hiring anyone, make sure that your contracts are rock solid so that tomorrow there's not some frivolous mechanic liens on the property, which happen quite often, especially in the disaster zone. And very fortunate and blessed to say that a lot of community members, really rolled up their sleeves and started forming more groups. So yeah, I provided resources from all my national advisors as much as I could. Mhm.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nidhi, for sharing that. I think it's helpful to kind of understand for people in other communities what it looks like to mobilize and where to turn for advice on where to get started is really important. So thanks for sharing that. Jasmine, I'd like to talk a little bit about land banking. I think a big fear after climate disasters is the potential for outside development to swoop in and see this as a business opportunity and really potentially change the makeup and the affordability of a region. So your nonprofit was the first community organization to implement an emergency land banking initiative after the fire. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the challenges and also what's working with that model.
Yeah, no. And so, um, Yes, absolutely. Disaster capitalism is a thing, which is when, after a natural disaster, property values are depressed. And so developers and investors see it as an opportunity to buy land inexpensively, develop it, and then sell it for profit. And so due to the fact that Altadena, it's a beautiful place, it's a desirable place. Real estate in Southern California, fire notwithstanding, is very valuable, right? And so I saw this happening very, very early on, just based on my experience as a real estate professional and an agent and a developer. I knew what would happen, right? And so, what I really wanted to demonstrate with that first lot purchase was that community members and organizations that care about the community and have the community's best interests in mind can have an equal and opposite reaction to the exploitation that so often happens after natural disasters. And this exploitation often disproportionately or is targeted at more vulnerable communities, such as those that we've talked about this whole call in West Altadena. And so I just made a couple phone calls to our local, the Pasadena Community Foundation, and I said, look, here's what's going to happen. These investors, I was keeping a running list of properties that were for sale and who was buying them. And the list got really, really long. And somebody on this call, actually, Iris with Sage, took that initial research that I started doing and expanded and did a much more in-depth analysis. But really what it showed is that the majority of these lots being sold were going to institutional investors or corporations or LLCs. And the research that I did on some of these, some were not even in the country, right? And so I think land banking presents an opportunity for community to have a say in how the land is used to meet housing needs that were an issue before the fire, to affect affordability in a very real and tangible way, and to prevent displacement of the people in the community that have called it home for many years. And so, yeah, I will shout it from the rafters. I think that community ownership of land, and there are multiple mechanisms for this, right? There's CLTs, there are, nonprofit organizations, there's affordable housing development, but really the thesis and at the heart of it is that the community has to have control of the land in order to affect outcomes that benefit the community. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious if you could talk, because it sounds like you moved very quickly. You sort of saw what was about to happen and jumped right on it and were able to secure this first property. Can you talk a little bit about how somebody would get started with creating a land banking initiative somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to collaboration, and that word has been used so often. I know Cynthia mentioned it, but really that's the only way to effectively scale a recovery to the magnitude of what is needed after a disaster like the Eaton fire. And so what has started to happen now is that there have been, as the organizations that are involved in land banking have kind of put together their strategy and their thesis and their disposition strategy for how they want to use the land, what are the objectives that they want to see for the community, and for us, it's single family housing and it's affordable and it's anti-displacement and it's retaining Black and brown home ownership and wealth, right? And so that's kind of our spoke on the wheel of recovery. So I think if a community is to get started in this, it has to be crystal clear on what the objectives are and who is the target population that they're trying to serve. That has to be informed by data and statistics of what the need is, right? I mean, at one point in Altadena, the Black population was over 40%. And then pre-fire, it was down to 18%. So displacement was an issue, or, this kind of displacement of this population was an issue even before the fire. We saw that as an issue, community members and organizations and policyholders and stakeholders. And we knew that it would be exacerbated by the fire if meaningful action wasn't taken. And so I would say, identify the problem, identify a solution, and then collaborate with community stakeholders. So like I said, the first grant that we received to purchase the first lot that kind of piloted this initiative was from the Pasadena Community Foundation. And then we started to be really intentional about who can we identify as financial partners, because, grant funds alone won't scale, and debt funds alone won't allow the flexibility that's needed to really achieve these objectives. And so it's really identifying financial partners and creative financial solutions and instruments. One of the lots we purchased here recently was a woman who owned a martial arts studio, a Black woman in West Altadena, had a martial arts studio she was renting. the place where she was renting burnt down in the fire. She really wanted to be able to purchase it, and because it's, zone multi-use, so commercial and residential, so that she could live there, so she could continue her business here in the community. She didn't have $475,000 in cash to be able to purchase this lot, but because of some program-related investment funds that Greenline received, we did, right? And we had the flexibility because of the beautiful terms of this financing to be able to purchase it, bank it, work with her to build the capacity and resources that she needs to buy it from us. So then that community member who was such a pillar in the community can remain in the community, and her small business can as well.
That's really incredible. I mean, I think it's really incredible to hear about this kind of a solution and how it in real time is helping a small business owner stay within the community. So thank you so much for sharing more about how that's going so far. And I'm eager to see kind of a year from now what it looks like. I have a question that I'd like to ask all the panelists, so you can kind of feel free to chime in on this, but I want to kind of broaden the scope on the conversation. And I'm curious, what you all would recommend for organizations, individuals who are starting from scratch and trying to rebuild from a similar climate disaster elsewhere. And maybe if there's like one resource or one piece of advice that you might offer them.
I'll be short and sweet on this one. I mean, there's, again, precedents, which Jasmine mentioned, and collaboration are key. So don't reinvent the wheel. See how your particular need and situation is mirrored out there in the world where people are already ahead. Lahaina, for example, or Paradise. You can sort of take the good and learn from the bad and hopefully avoid the ugly.
I'll piggyback on Steve's advice. Definitely keep in line with your area of expertise. We picked prefab because I understood the cost of construction from the price per square foot point of view, and the deeper we started working within the community and other community coalitions and members, we realized that the disproportionate underinsured people on the west side really needed this solution. So our very focused solution was half the price, half the time we can get people into their home. And of course, with the intention of that, if somebody decided to sell their land, that should be their choice and not out of a financial distress situation, and especially after a disaster.
Yeah, and I guess from our side, one of the things that I think, a lot of the organizations that have been working in Altadena successfully have in common is that they are very, rooted in this community, and they listen to the people that we're trying to help. I think sometimes as professionals, it's easy to kind of come in with your own ideas about how you think rebuilding should happen, or what's best for a community. But it's really important to listen to the people and learn about their stories and what they envision for their community, and then as professionals with the tools and the knowledge to execute to help make it happen.
Yeah, and I think my fellow panelists have said it really well. I don't have too much more to add, except for I think collaboration is really key, and I think identifying one specific lane is crucial, because we're all kind of spokes on the wheel of recovery, is what I like to say. And the wheel of recovery is big, and it has to be, because the lift is heavy, right? But, heavy things are lighter when shared. And so really being crystal clear on, here's the objective that we are trying to accomplish, and here's the reason. You can really collaborate. Okay, well, if you need this, I know this organization does this, or I know this person is doing this. And that helps to avoid duplicate efforts. And it helps, quite frankly, from a funding standpoint, when resources are coming into a community, for them to really know, okay, if this is what I'm trying to support, I know that these 3 organizations or these 4 organizations are doing that. And so I think that that's really crucial to be crystal clear, insofar as one is able, because it's very fluid and it's an iterative process often. But just being clear on, okay, this is our spoke on the wheel, because I think there can be a temptation sometimes to be all things to all people for organizations, and that's just not sustainable. It's not realistic, and it's not effective.
That's a really good point. I mean, I think something as a journalist that I've noticed in the early days of recovery is just how many groups sprang out. It was amazing to see, right? People just really wanted to help and really wanted to find solutions. But I think what has been key is seeing leaders like yourself, who I've seen you all at events and coordinating with people and trying to figure out like how to steer people in the right direction, how to figure out how to collaborate across different types of solutions has been really interesting to see in order to make real progress in communities. So I think that's a really good point. Um, Looks like we have some really great audience questions, so I'd love to dive into that. Let's see. Let's start with Susan Christian from Germantown, Residents for Economic Alternatives Together in Philadelphia, said we are working on building resilience hubs in the neighborhood. What do we need to know now so that when disaster strikes, we're better prepared? So this is sort of a question we're seeking an answer to address. So anyone want to weigh in on that?
I was on a panel several months ago where the same question was brought up, and it's a great one. Um, and I don't know that there's any kind of earth-shattering thing that I can say, well, if you do this, 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 and this, you'll be prepared for a natural disaster. But I think that, there are some kind of guiding principles that could be helpful, and that is just become aware of what organizations are doing what in the community. And that sounds really trite, but there was a lot of, oh, you do that, or you do that, or I didn't know you were here. I didn't know, and so I think becoming aware, and I think building relationships with your local policymakers, kind of initially would be really, really helpful. I mean, Cynthia mentioned and Steve mentioned that they've, all met with Supervisor Barger, who is our local supervisor here. But, having those relationships before the natural disaster hits can help be positioned. And I think I'll speak from kind of a CDFI or financing standpoint. That was the panel that I was speaking on when this question was asked. And I think for potential community stakeholders, to identify and invest in organizations on the ground in a community to solve the needs that are already there, right? Because oftentimes natural disasters illuminate, right? They illuminate issues and problems that were already present. And so to have a more proactive approach and, okay, what is this community facing? And that comes through relationship, right? And so I think those relationships are crucial.
Absolutely. I'm looking for my thumbs up emoji. Can't find it. But, it occurred to me that when I was in elementary school back in the 60s, we had nuclear drills. We were on the last end of that. And then out here we have earthquake drills. So that heightens an awareness and a consciousness among the general public before, a nuclear war or whatever. And so organizing the community in ways that particularly involve the youth of that community and their awareness and letting them kind of lead in an interest of preparedness, which is to say that you can begin to identify the organizations and the partners that Jasmine's referring to ahead of anything and do it under the guise of preparedness, So that's one of many spokes in that wheel.
And I would like to add on to that, if there is anyone in this audience who would like to do some groundwork to make sure that they can be, or their efforts can be integral in saving many structures in future fires, because fires are going to happen, disasters are getting more severe and more often. Many homes in all over California have swimming pools. So creating a program where you can get a pump that you can stick into a pool and hose your property down, you can save not just your structure, but also your neighbor's structure. And this is one regret. And I would rephrase that now that speaking in hindsight, this is one lesson that I've learned, that had we had that pool pump, we could have saved not just our structure, but also our community structure. So this is one thing that if somebody wants to put some initial effort and create a training module of how you can utilize your own water in the pool and save structures, I think that would really, become a movement that can actually save a lot of structures.
Yeah, that is a really practical takeaway for a program that people could do in various communities. So thanks for pointing that out. Um, we have another question here, a little bit about the costs and the red tape of rebuilding homes. Somebody asks, hasn't some of the codes and inspections that exist in California caused the cost and size of homes to increase? Are there ways for the cost of things like inspections to be addressed or reduced to bring down the costs? And does getting home designs pre-approved help with reducing some of this cost and this red tape?
Yeah, I can try to answer as best I can. I think, when it comes to typical costs, it's true, in California, there's a very stringent building code and energy code that does, affect the cost of construction. Things like solar panels, some of the other methods to increase the energy efficiency of a home does come with cost. That being said, there are also you know things coming from a policy standpoint, trying to make it a little easier for fire rebuild specifically with solar ready instead of solar requirements, or rebuilding what's called like for like here, which you may have heard that term, but essentially meaning that if you are rebuilding a structure that is generally the same square footage and bed bath count, that kind of thing, from what you had before, then you would be kind of exempt from a lot of the typical processes that you would go through in permitting. For the pre-approval, what that really helps with is not only the design process, so going through, thinking about designing a home from scratch is very overwhelming for a lot of people. And so being able to essentially bypass that and then go a step further with permitting, which is, we're seeing it pan out to be a several month process, even though, there is efforts to speed that up as much as possible. And so, tackling those two hurdles of time and also, the costs associated with design and permitting, and also just the, emotional bandwidth that's required to make all these decisions and be experts at things from insurance to design to, everything that you all of a sudden need to know about. And so that's really the objective that we're trying to achieve here with the pre-approved plan, and helping to make more streamlined solutions accessible and attainable for homeowners.
If I could piggyback just on a tangential piece, which came up in a previous question about prefab, the idea of ADUs as a vehicle for people who are underinsured to actually reestablish themselves on their property, obviously not for everyone. We're already seeing a number of lots where the ADUs are showing up before the principal home is rebuilt. There's a very interesting gentleman up on Fair Oaks. He happens to be like a 78-year-old white man named Ronald, who installed a pair of nano nests on his lot. And I was driving the president of NOMA around the area when he was visiting, and we saw that, and I backed up and went up the driveway, and this guy was watering the dirt in front of his new nano nest, and he invited us in, and you walk up a couple of steps, and it's a little bouncy, but it's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, and he had it installed and connected to utilities for $80,000 all in. And so there are those options available, and it's not a one-size-fits-all for sure. But it'd be interesting, and I'll pursue this conversation with some of you offline after, about your thoughts and feelings about the ADU opportunity.
Yeah, I certainly think there's been a lot of different conversations on how it helps communities, timelines, and things like that. There's an interesting question here about workforce. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, but Nancy Miller of Sonoma County asks, what are the main workforce needs in Pasadena and Altadena for the rebuild and restore efforts? I'm curious if any of you have thought about that as it intersects with some of your work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a number of structures that need to be built, and so therefore there are a number of bodies that need I mean, just really practically and simply, I think and this is a program that I think several organizations in the community are already trying to a solution that they're trying to affect, which is, yeah, how do we increase the availability of construction workers and contractors, right? And people that can actually do, have the skills and technical skills necessary and knowledge to rebuild structures. And so I think that that's one that could be very timely and helpful, again, as we consider just the amount of labor that the recovery will take.
Well, what's really challenging about that, as we all know, is there are two things that are affecting the costs. One of them is tariffs, which are putting a burden on the cost of materials. And the other one is the rounding up of much of our labor force and sending them out of the country, or creating a level of fear, so much so that someone might forego showing up at the job site, even if they are a citizen. So these are short-term problems that have the potential to become longer-term challenges. And I think it's incumbent upon our communities, as we're seeing stand up around the country around issues that are threatening our very existence as a democratic society. So I'll get off my political soapbox.
I would also like to add on that. We've been very mindful of making sure that we employ or give the first preference to the residents and the community members who lost their homes. So our very early approach was we practically called every single reverse mortgage homeowner who had reverse mortgage, and also on the commercial corridor that was Lake Avenue. And based on our groundwork within the community, we started databasing a lot of community members who were in the construction industry in some shape or form, subcontractors, contractors. So we've been very, very mindful of making sure that how can we be the source of keeping the dollars and the revenue and the economy that would be generated from the rebuilding effort to keeping it as local as possible, and then gradually go forward. And I 100% agree with Steve. I mean, especially in moments like this when we have two almost cities to rebuild, and there is a vulnerability for the workforce to show up at work. I was fortunate to leverage on my Rolodex, and I called in some of the out-of-state builders for them to come have temporary bases, or out of state or from the other part of the state to come down to make sure that we have enough labor force, because one of the ways that we can keep the price per square foot of the construction costs down is by ensuring that we have enough labor force. So having a local or a central center where people can come in and add themselves in the database for the pool of workers that we need, I think would be crucial and has been integral.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. It looks like we're at time now. So I just want to thank all of our speakers for sharing the work that they're doing in Altadena, sharing their advice for how to do this in other communities. I think it's really valuable because, as was mentioned, these types of disasters are happening with increasing severity, and it's something that communities need to learn skill sets around how to rebuild communities and increase that resilience. So thank you all so much. Thank you to everybody who joined today's webinar. And thank you to everyone who contributed to our Pay What You Wish model for fundraising. If you haven't yet made a contribution, it's not too late. Please consider to do so for our end of year campaign. You can do so online. And I think we can drop the link into the chat, but it's nextcity.org/donate. And thank you so much to the Results for America for sponsoring this event series. If you want to rewatch the webinar and get Solutions for the Year magazine, click the links into the chat. And thank you again. Cheers to more solutions in 2026.